President Obama avoided calling waterboard and the Bush administration's legal justifications for it a crime last night. And earlier this week, former Bush National Security Advisor and Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice seems to be channeling Richard Nixon here. Listen to what she said about waterboarding in this rather crude video we have right now, which was shot by a student at Stanford.
The President instructed us that nothing we would do would be outside of our obligations, legal obligations, under the Convention Against Torture. So that's, and by the way, I didn't authorize anything. I conveyed the authorization of the administration to the agency that they had policy authorization subject to the Justice Department's clearance.
Okay.
That's what I did.
Is waterboarding torture in your
And
opinion?
I just said, the United States was told, we were told, nothing that violates our obligations under the Convention Against Torture. And so, by definition, if it was authorized by the President, it did not violate our obligations under the Convention Against Torture.
So what do we make of that when she said, and by definition, if it was authorized by the President, it did not violate our obligations under the Convention Against Torture, Pat? What's that mean?
Well, I don't know. I think, well, obviously it means exactly what it says, that they don't think that waterboarding, if it was authorized, was in violation of the Conventions Against Torture. But if saying the President, if he authorizes something, it can be legal, I guess it's like what they did in World War II when FDR and Truman authorized black bag jobs on various embassies to go in and steal equipment and things like that. They stole the code books that my cousin Meredith Gardner used to break the Soviet code and do the Venona transcripts. Does the President have this extraordinary authority in time of war? I think it's something you ought to take up to the Supreme Court.
I'm going to take it up with the Professor Jonathan Turley of GW Law. Let me ask you that. Can a president define the law? Can he say, as Nixon said famously, if I say it, it's legal? And this is a case where the Condoleezza Rice, the former Secretary of State, is quoted here by that student photographer who picked that up on his cell phone or her cell phone, quote, if it was authorized by the President, it did not violate our obligations under the Convention. Well, what's that mean, by the way?
First of all, it's been in the
Pat said it has a meaning. If the President says it's okay, what does that say?
Well, first of all, it's already been to the Supreme Court, but more importantly, this is the dividing line between tyranny and a democracy. That is, if a president can become law unto himself, that whatever he says has the fiat of authority, then you no longer have a democratic system. We rejected that a very long time ago, thank God. It defines us as a people. And Nixon learned very well that his theory of the law did not apply, and he found himself chased out of office and ultimately needing a presidential pardon.
With due respect, first, Nixon was never indicted at all by the House Judiciary for the bombing of Cambodia, presumably outside the law, and Abraham Lincoln trampled all over the United States Constitution, suspended unilaterally habeas corpus for 15,000 people, correct?
Yeah, but you see, the problem, Pat, is this goes with your argument that we bombed Hiroshima, that anything short of nuclear annihilation is probably okay now. The fact is that we signed a treaty. We gave our word that we would prosecute torture. It's our word. When you were working for Nixon and when you were working for Reagan, you often criticized the Soviets that they couldn't be trusted when they signed treaties. Right. Well, we are supposed to be trusted. We gave our word as a nation that we would prosecute people who tortured. And so this is a crime on our books.
All right, well, you know, look, first you're saying that's torture and that is in dispute. I agree with you. I think it ought to go up to the Supreme Court. Let me ask you, he cited Winston Churchill last night. You know, Churchill would not do this. Churchill firebombed the city of Dresden, a city defenseless, February 1945, burned to death hundreds of 100,000 men, women, and children who were refugees. Was that a war crime?
Pat, according to your logic, the president could go out and douse someone on Pennsylvania Avenue and burn them alive. No. The point is that was an act in a wartime. At the time, they did do blanket bombing. Today, by the way, many of the things that we did in World War II might be viewed as a war crime. But that's beside the point. We signed a treaty. We gave our word on torture. We're talking about torture, a defined crime for which we prosecuted other countries for.
Well, wait a minute.
Well, let's take a look at the president here. I want to get into what can be prosecuted, but here's the president last night giving his delineation when he was asked if the Bush administration sanctioned torture. Let's listen.
What I've said, and I will repeat, is that waterboarding violates our ideals and our values. I do believe that it is torture. I don't think that's just my opinion. That's the opinion of many who've examined the topic. And that's why I put an end to these practices. am absolutely convinced it was the right thing to do. I believe that waterboarding was torture, and I think that whatever legal rationales were used, it was a mistake.
Well, how do we solve this dispute between you and Pat about whether something is proper governmental decision-making, proper decision-making by the president? Let me ask you about the legal qualification. If you take a really tough-ass prosecutor like Patrick Fitzgerald and you get him with the right attitude, you know, rub some blood in his nose or whatever it takes to get that guy mad at somebody, and he really gets going, what crime would he hold this administration to and put him in jail for or whatever? What would the crime be that under the U.S. Code that he could prosecute torture for?
Well, first of all, it's a target-rich environment. He could go for 18 U.S.C. 2340, which is the Torture Act. There's also the War Crimes Act. There's a military act that he could apply. You can also prosecute
people. And they all have sanctions. They have clear sanctions.
And you could prosecute people for assault and battery. This is an assault upon a human being outside the authority of law. And on top of that, it's a direct violation of the Convention of Torture. Even Rice herself admitted that was a primary concern that they had. And by the way,
these legal opinions granted by the top government people working for President Bush, at his request, these legal opinions would not protect people. Well, if these crimes were committed under the law, they would be prosecuted no matter what legal advisory they'd gotten.
In fact, the law that she cited, the Convention Against Torture, Article 2 says that it is not a defense to say that you received an order from a superior officer or someone in public authority. It's expressly ruled out as a defense.
So why did all these guys seek legal opinions in this administration? Why was there so much writing of opinions about torture?
Because they were trying to get legal cover. And when you read the memos, it's clear. These memos read like a mob lawyer writing to his client of how to avoid a criminal charge. And unfortunately, you can't. If you're going to commit a war crime, it's pretty hard to avoid that.
Look, let me dissent from Chief Justice Turley here. Look, the way to decide this, quite simply, is to have the administration and the liberals, if they believe this, to prosecute, to call up the President of the United States and the members of the security, just take the President and make the charge against him. Waterboarding is torture. We declare it to be so. Take this to court, take it up to the Supreme Court, who will throw it over to the Congress of the United States, because a matter in dispute between the President and when the President can only be thrown out, my guess is, or at least they'll give an opinion, and let them decide the damn thing, because there's disagreement. Now, you say these lawyers simply went up and wrote cover. I don't know that. I don't know that they're dishonest guys. They may be mistaken. There are soldiers who say it's torture. There are soldiers who say it's not. There are civilians who disagree on it. Put it through the courts if that's what you want to do.
No one's disagreeing this is torture. We have case authorities saying it's torture. Most people have given up this argument, this canard, that waterboarding is not torture. We prosecuted people for waterboarding. Other countries...
Why is the President...
You just saw the Secretary of State say that it was not. She said it was not a violation.
Why is the President...
She's on the target list.
Why does President Obama keep calling it a mistake, which sounds like he's pulling his punches?
Well, I got to tell you, I'm very disappointed with that. I mean, he has consistently avoided using the word crime with torture, and many civil
because then he would have
libertarians...
to act.
Well, you see, well, he doesn't have that problem when he refers to terrorism. Terrorism, he says, is a crime.
No, but we don't have those people in... And if he has a crime that he sees being perpetrated by a previous administration, wouldn't he have to prosecute it?
I honestly believe that this is all political considerations trumping principle. But what is confusing to people around the world is it makes our president look like he's not recognizing the obvious fact that torture is a crime. It's not his decision. When he said, I thought it was the right decision, it's not his decision. He doesn't have the authority to torture. Neither did his predecessor.
Okay. When does the president have a moral right to break the law?
Well, FDR.
Does he ever?
Sure he does. FDR.
Never?
He doesn't have a right to break the law.
Of course.
Never.
The laws are defined. The nation committed to the rule of law.
Okay, well, are we allowed to... If Vice President Cheney, and I'm no fan, obviously, if he had shot down that plane, if it had made it all the way to Washington, was headed for the Capitol,
that's not necessarily a violation of the law.
That isn't a violation of the law.
Not necessarily. It depends on the circumstances. The president, if the president does have the authority to act to protect the country, but there's certain things that he cannot do.
He's not killing hundreds.
He's
not directly killing people. He is defending the Capitol from what became, in effect, an enemy missile. Take FDR. He put 100,000 Japanese, many of them American citizens, into literally concentration camps, and the Supreme Court took it to the Supreme Court. They said, go ahead and do it. It's legitimate. Later on, we all apologized because we said that was a crime, violation of their rights.
You know, Pat just gave the exact reason why Obama has to prosecute people here, because in 20 years, there'll be Pat Buchanan Jr. sitting here and saying, look what George Bush did, and he wasn't prosecuted. And we can hang him on meat hooks.
It becomes a precedent.
That's right. That's why we have to draw a line.
Good argument. Should we continue? Jonathan Turley.